If you are someone who is grieving the loss of a loved one or have grieved the loss of a loved one, then I don't think you're going to want to miss this conversation with Jamie Amos. Not long ago, Jamie experienced something tragic in her life. 2 of her loved ones were killed in a car accident. She's going to share about that accident. She's going to share about her history with addiction. And she's going to talk to us about how she's dealing with grief in sobriety. So here we go with Jamie Amos.
Here, we want to show you what's possible in the world of sobriety. We introduce you to the various tools, programs, and resources available, because there are way more options than you may even realize. We want you to find the one that works for you.
And we do it through people who share their pathway to recovery and will help you find your path to freedom. Because getting sober can feel hard enough. You don't have to do it alone. I'm Sarah Roberts.
And I'm Roger DeVoe, and this is Sobriety Starts Here.
Jamie Amos, I have been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time now, and yet I knew that until the time was divinely timed, that this conversation wouldn't happen. So I just feel like right here, right now, today, in this moment is the exact right moment for us to be together. Welcome. Thank you for being here, Jamie.
Man, thank you for having me. I am so excited and also really appreciative that we put this off. Like a couple of times when we talked, I really thought I was ready and I wasn't. And I'm so grateful that now I've got a little perspective, but I also have a lot more to report because, there's been a lot of time.
There's been a lot of time. And so for people that aren't familiar already with Jamie Amos and her story, Jamie, why don't you go ahead and share with our viewers and our listeners what changed in your life back in February?
Absolutely. I'll start a little bit before that. So in 2017, my grandpa, who helped raise me, was diagnosed with cancer. And he was, a very crotchety old man and had lived a really great long life and, was like roofing his own house at 80. Like he was that kind of guy. But he had 5 kids. He had a lot of grandkids. He had a great long life. And, the cancer rapidly metastasized, and then we lost him at the end of November. And I went out to stay with my grandparents. I was there for his death. And there was a lot of peace around that death. A lot of sorrow and a lot of grief, but also a lot of peace. It felt like the natural order of things. And then 2 months later, I lost my mother and my grandmother in a car accident. And my youngest brother, who was 23 at the time, was actually driving. Now, he was physically okay, but my mom was killed instantly, and my grandmother died of her injuries 1 day later. And that in no way felt like the natural order of things. It really, I don't know that I can adequately describe the shock of finding it out. I kept asking my husband, as we couldn't find her, is my mom dead? Is my mom dead? My husband's here with me, and he couldn't answer me, but it felt like that for, weeks. Is she really dead? But
can you share with us, what do you mean when you said that you couldn't find your mom?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sorry. So my mom had been staying with my grandmother since my grandfather died. And my dad and my brother drove from Illinois, where everybody lived, to Florida to actually pick my mom up and take her back to Illinois. Now my mom and my dad were having some, marital issues. They reconciled. So my youngest brother and my dad were down there to pack her up and move her back. And the car accident happened while my mom, my grandmother, and my brother were on the way to the grocery store. My brother is used to driving in Illinois, and we get automatic left turn arrows. And in Florida, that doesn't happen. So he was driving on a highway in Sebring, Florida, that he was unfamiliar with. And I have a lot of rage at the Florida highway system, because these are highways lined with, department stores and Lowe's and grocery stores, but these are also places people do 55 to 60, and they go really fast. So my brother assumed he had an arrow, and it's like one of those split-second mistakes. He made his left turn, and they were T-boned by one car, and then another car hit them, and then 2 others hit them. The van, the van flipped, and I think the third car is the one. So like they were T-boned, the van flipped, and then a car hit them on top. And my mom took the impact of all of that. But my brother and my grandmother were airlifted to a hospital about 2 hours away. And I got the phone call from my youngest brother because he had his phone. And so he had my number. And he's telling me, like, Jamie, there was a really bad accident, and, I'm okay. And at that time, we thought my grandma was okay. They were telling him to protect him, that grandma was okay. Understandably, because everybody was driving this 2 hours to get to him. So he wasn't by himself. But he said to me, I'm really worried about mom. And I'm like, oh, okay, she's not at the hospital with you, baby. I will find her. And so I had to start calling police stations and hospitals and the highway patrol, trying to track down my mother. And I was, in my kitchen, sort of leaning over the counter on the phone with people. And just the way my brother had said, I'm worried about our mom. I knew, but I didn't know. I knew, but I didn't want it to be true. Mm-hmm. So I finally found the correct highway patrol that had handled the accident. And when I was on the phone for the second time with the woman, because she was actually trying to track down my mom too, she finally got the police report back, and she's reading it, and she's like, okay, your brother and your grandma were taken here, blah, blah, blah. In the meantime, my husband's on the couch frantically searching for like a news update or something that was local to them. Mm-hmm. And he's asking me, what color's the van, which is what they were driving. And it was new. I didn't know. And he's reading, there's been one fatality, so I think he knew before I did. But as the dispatcher is reading through the report, your brother's been taken here, your grandma's been taken here, your mom, and just the way she stopped, I knew, like, at that moment, my mom, they didn't know where my mom was because she never left the scene. She was dead on impact. And so there was, I would say, about 4 or 5 hours where we officially did not know. I knew in that moment, but a couple of hours later, my brother called and said the police finally walked in, and they came and they told him that we had lost her. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of, like, it sounds really strange, but I got a lot of blessings out of this accident. One, my mom was killed instantly. She did not suffer. Mm-hmm. The other one was in the time that we thought my grandma was okay. The nurse who was in her room knew that, my brother had my number. She got that number, and she put me on the phone with my grandma while she was still conscious. So I was the last person to speak with her. And I got to tell her, I love you so much, and you're going to be okay. And and please, anyone who's watching this is like, oh my God, your macabre humor. Like, this is how my family survives. We have macabre humor. In like such an 12-step sort of Al-Anon family moment, my grandma was like, I'm fine, Jamie. I'm going to be totally fine. Like, nothing's really wrong. And it turns out, like, she was actually bleeding internally. She was swollen. Her brain was swelling at the time. But, like, that moment was so my grandma. Chaos could be happening, and my grandma would be like, everything's okay. We're going to be fine.
Oh. Sometimes you need those moments, right, with people in your life that can provide that kind of relief in those times of tension. I know that sometimes in a really tense situation, I'll laugh, and I'm like, what am I laughing for? But it somehow kind of relieves that bit of tension. But okay, so
I'll tell you one more. So one of the things that the reason there was so much relief around my mom passing is that she was morbidly obese. She was probably about 500 pounds before she went to Florida, and she was only 5'1". And she had been, my grandma had been like trying to help her lose weight. So she died at 450. So the day she dies, I call my brother, and we're both, of course, sobbing. But then I also said, how much would it please Mom that she didn't die of her weight? And that, like, basically her children had to suck it because that's not what killed her.
Honestly, small blessings, right?
And my brother laughed so hard. So it was one of those saving grace moments of the day.
I'd love to ask you, I know we'll continue on with the story of the tragedy, but I'm wondering about your mom's weight. I know that you've written about it before, that it almost it insulated her and it pushed you away in many ways. You had a very complicated relationship with your mother. Do you want to share about that now, or would you rather keep going with your story?
Yeah, I do. I did have a very complicated relationship with my mom. Until the, I mean, even still, I'm still working through it.
Yeah.
So my mom had me at 20. She was the middle of 4 girls who grew up thinking that they had to compete for love. And my mom, there was never enough love for my mom. So my mom was the 4 girls, we're all Eastern European, and we're very we're Yugoslavian. We're very plump in the middle. They were very short, but my mom got the most of our lineage in that she just looked so much like my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother. And among these 3 sort of very lithe, California beachy girls, my mom was the plump one from the day she was born. And there was a lot of shame around that, put on her by my grandmother, who really valued, who thought a woman's value was in her body size and her looks. Mm-hmm. And so my mom was put on her first diet by a doctor at age 11. And I really do feel like the way that she told me that story, like I can pinpoint the moment that food became a source both of shame and comfort for her. And so from that point forward with that diet, she would sneak food while her sisters were having to, you are forced to abstain from something, you're forbidden from something, and it becomes the obsession.
Mm. And the shame of it when you succumb to the cravings and you eat that food that you know you're not supposed to have. And
then your mom finds out, and then you're berated in front of the family for hiding sleeves of crackers in your room. And there was just so much wrapped up for my mom in that. And so she was built to be a larger woman. Same with me. Like I am not a healthy size 2. I'm a healthy 10 to 12. Like that's just, we're thicker. Mm-hmm. But that was not acceptable in her family. So in that way, that's sort of the way that we are in addiction, the forbiddenness, the giving in, the shame cycle, the secretiveness. My mom started that right then.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm wondering, so you were saying that you can pinpoint the moment where that all kind of started for your mom. Are you meaning at age 11 when she was put on that doctor's diet and she told you about that later, or?
She did. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, I don't know that she definitely knew what an impact that had, but in the way of her storytelling, like it felt to me as if that's the moment that set her on a trajectory that would eventually, she had me at 20. And she was really invested in being a good mom as a very young woman. And I feel like it's an appropriate time. This is my mom at 17.
Hi, Mama.
Yeah. So she just built to be a thicker woman. So she had me at 20. And, my biological father was someone who withheld love. So what did she do? She goes out, she seeks love. She finds the person who will not give it to her. And he wasn't very interested in being a parent. And I would say for the first few years of my life, my mom was really invested in I'm going to do this parenting thing full throttle. And the evidence of that is my baby book is filled out completely. She knitted me blankets. I can see a very young version of my mom really believing in a fantasy of motherhood that it could save her. Mm-hmm. And later in her life, she said something to that, she's like, I thought having a baby, that I would have something to love me unconditionally. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And instead she got me. I'm kidding. But young children, we're demanding. Young children are little demanding heathen human beings. Just, feed me, burp me, I pooped. Mm-hmm. And then she did it as a single mom. And around 4 years old, my mom started drinking a lot and became an alcoholic and used a lot of cocaine. And
do you have memories of that? Or is this being recounted to you later?
No, I definitely remember this. So at the time we were living in Illinois, my grandparents were in Florida. And, I have memories of being in the back of a car with a little pallet because my mom was inside drinking and raising up and realizing it's the middle of the night. I have memories of being at parties really young. I remember, being left alone. Some of my strongest memories at like around 4 or 5 are being left alone and staying up most of the night, praying to this like little teddy bear that was my best friend that she make it home safely. Because even at that age, I understood that she was in danger from her drinking.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So like sets the ground for complications.
Yeah, I'd say.
My mom also really viewed me as, she just sort of decided that I was very smart young and that I was smarter than her. So I was, critiquing her English papers when I was in like 2nd grade.
Oh, so she wasn't looking at it like you were criticizing her or judging her because you were smarter. She was leveraging that.
Yeah. And then also using me as the emotional support that she didn't have anywhere else in her life. And so early on, my role was like, it's like our parental roles were reversed, even though I was a very, very little child. Mm-hmm. So she meets my stepfather who raised me, and I adore to death. And they get married, but they also have a bit of a cocaine problem. It's the 80s. Mm-hmm. But my mom always had a really strong desire to be a good mother. So my brothers are born, and
with your stepdad. So how old are you when your mother meets your stepdad? And were you the kind of kid that was excited about this? You said that you really got along with him, but was this a positive thing in your life during that time?
No, absolutely not. I very much was, I felt like I was in a revolving door of men, and I resented that. I didn't trust men. I felt very protective of my mother. I didn't want him around my mother.
Yeah. Because I'm wondering, there must have been a lot of codependency between you and your mom. You not knowing that you were getting involved in this codependent relationship, but very, very much it's coming from your mom's needs.
Yeah, absolutely. We were completely enmeshed until probably about 7 years ago, like into my 30s.
Wow. Okay.
So no, my stepfather, but here's the beautiful thing about him. While he struggles with an immense amount of mental illness and things are really difficult for him, and we have absolutely had our differences, from the moment he came in my life, he treated me like I was his daughter. So all of my rejection, all of my like, you're not my dad, go away, he really just let that flow. And so, he was patient with me. Mm-hmm. But I also knew they were partying a lot. I resented that. I come from a pretty poor family, so we were always struggling financially. There was always substance abuse problems. Our lives were really chaotic. Sometimes I was living with them. Sometimes I was living with my grandparents. And then my first brother was born when I was 10.
And is all of this happening in New Orleans? I know that's where you live now.
No, I moved here as an adult. That was all happening between Florida, Illinois, Kentucky. We moved around constantly. I didn't spend a full year in a school until I was, I think, in 8th or 9th grade.
Wow.
Yeah. So just in general, I had this really chaotic childhood. There wasn't a lot of safety. I was the authority. So I was sort of the trusted confidant of my mother. And, she'd be like asking my advice for things. And that we like went on that way, like it worked, and that we had worked that out. Then my mom had my brother at 10, and then my other brother at 15. And
like
my mom
you're 10 and you're 15.
Yeah, I'm 10
years old. That's a long time to be an only child and then go to not being an only child.
My husband actually says that's what's wrong with me, that I was an only child too long.
That's what's wrong with me. Okay. I love it. Okay. All right. So at 10 and then again at 15, both from your stepdad that you have a close relationship with.
Yeah. And I'm super close to both my brothers. Like, we're not half, we're whole, like really, really close. So my responsibility in the household just grew and grew and grew. And then around 14 years old, my stepdad accidentally dropped a gun, and then it went off. And it shot through the main artery in his leg, up through his stomach, and out his back. So
what? This does not happen.
It's insane.
It seems like keep going.
No, right? Don't I seem like that crazy person you meet who's like, and then my cat died, and then my car blew up, and then...
The fact that you have this macabre sense of humor, the fact that you find the way to laugh through it at times, and I know you also go through all of the other emotions, but truly it is a testament to your strong-willed nature. It's absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
Okay, so guy shoots himself.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he wasn't supposed to live. But so that meant we had a 6-month-old and a 4-year-old in the house. And I mean, out of necessity, I became mom. And so that's about 14. So this is where the addiction comes in. That immense amount of responsibility that I took on, I needed a release valve for it. And so that's about the time that I started smoking pot and drinking.
Absolutely. Can I ask, so when you're talking about taking on this immense responsibility, is this because your mother is no longer equipped? Is this because of the accident with your stepdad? Like, why is all of this pressure put on you?
So he, excuse me. So he was actually in the ICU for weeks. I mean, he really was not supposed to make it through surgery. They did surgery, I think, for like 14 hours. And they came out halfway through and they told my mom, prepare yourself. Like, we don't think we can save him. And they did. But that led to months of him being in the hospital and my mom having to be up there with him and, you know, having to be there to make decisions. Having to be there whenever. So he was managed with either morphine or something like that gave him horrific hallucinations. And so my mom was with him, and then it was my responsibility to be with the children.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then
was
that's
that discussed with you. Like, I'm wondering if it was ever sort of a, Jamie, this is what we're going to need you to do, or if it was just fully expected that you were going to take on the role.
Totally expected. I mean, there had been so much established that was kind of my job to be the responsible one in the family already. I mean, I was primed for it. Yeah. And my mom definitely expressed regret later, but I think that she couldn't see that I'd been playing this role way before that point. It's just at that point, it became full time.
Did you resent it in those moments? Like during that crisis situation, were you kind of like, I'm primed for this. This is what I'm going to help do. And this is exactly the role I need to play right now. Or were you like, I'm 14. I should not have to be doing this. And this is just yet another example of how my life is fucked. And, you know, like, how are you feeling?
I was really like, I think because our lives had been so chaotic and I felt this like, I felt like I could actually de-escalate situations and handle crises and mediate between people. Like at 14, I really believed that I had this ability. And so I wasn't resentful. I was really just like, well, this is what we do in a crisis. I'm still that way. In a crisis, call me. I'm calm. I'm like, there's 5 things we're going to do. Yes. And it's automatic. I can't shut it off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I wasn't resentful until he was home. They said he'd never walk again. He did. They said he wouldn't walk without a limp. He's like, whatever, I'm going to do it. He did. And things never went back to normal. My mom never recovered from that. So I was still the mom. Mm. And that's when I got resentful. And that's when I went crazy rebellious. Mm-hmm. And that was also the point where my mom wanted to assert authority over me that she had never established. And so that began our wars, our all out wars. And that really, so like she would throw me out of the house and then call the police to bring me back. You know, she would throw me out of the house and then pick me up, and I got put into a behavioral disorder center for kids who were doing drugs, acting out. I was doing drugs. I lied through my teeth the whole time. I was really good at that. Like, I'm perfect. I'm a good girl. I get great grades in school.
Mm-hmm. And were you ever pointing the finger at your mom saying she's hooked on alcohol and cocaine? It's not my problem. It's her problem. Like, I'm curious about the dynamic there.
So by that time, she'd actually stopped. So once my youngest brother was about 2, she really quit everything cold turkey. But she started picking up food. Yeah. So that leads back to like, where did the weight come from? Well, when she gave up her other vices and didn't pursue any kind of recovery or, self-actualization, like she switched to food. Mm-hmm. And then over the years, her weight ballooned and ballooned. So I was doing I was doing meth, I was doing coke. By 17, I was shooting up coke. But I was still super functional and getting good grades in school. And I could present. So the only time I really ever pointed my finger at my mom, essentially my attitude was like, I have this. What is your problem?
Yep.
I have my own apartment. I'm like, I've got this. Like, why are you not letting me do what I want to do? The only time that I pointed my finger at her is when she stuck me in that center. We had family counseling, and I was manipulating the situation to be like, I'm not addicted. I'm not on drugs. My only issues are my family. And they believed me. And my mom was like stuck there, sort of, having to take all of the responsibility, because I presented myself better and could manipulate the situation to make myself believed over her. Ultimately, we shared the responsibility.
Now, did she have hard evidence that you were doing, your mom doing cocaine, meth, drinking, all of it? Or was she just suspecting like other people were? Like, did she know you were doing it and then you're denying it and she's sitting there like, what do I do here?
I don't think she needed hard. I mean, the other thing about our codependency was like an inappropriately honest relationship. So I told her. Mm-hmm. I didn't hide any of those things. So she didn't have to snoop. She didn't have to look. We, in moments of confidence, I would share those types of things. Mm-hmm. And then later I would totally deny that had ever happened. Mm-hmm. I was good at it. And it's only now, like, I'm almost 40 now, but for years I held on to I couldn't have admitted that. I really was like, I wasn't doing that much. I was experimenting, and she overreacted. Now I can look back and be like, it's never really appropriate for your 17-year-old to be shooting up coke. That's never appropriate.
No.
So it's only now I can take my responsibility for that, for like my actions that, that she should have been worried.
And when you say now, do you mean now, or do you mean 4, 5, 6 years ago?
I mean, like 4, 5, 6 years ago. I started therapy, around 30. And so that's when I was there to work on my relationship with her. I knew we weren't healthy. I knew I couldn't carry the burden of her emotions anymore and her depression. Mm-hmm. But slowly through that, I started to be able to see that I, as an adult, was contributing. It wasn't just, I wasn't just being victimized by my mom.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So you're about 17, you're in this your mom's trying to put you into this program and everything else. So what else is going on?
I moved out at 17. I got my own apartment. So I get out of that program, and that was like a reset for our family. I shouldn't even say reset. My mom gave up. Like, that was the moment that my mom, I think, was like, I'm licked, sort of, that my will was stronger. Mm-hmm. And so I moved out when I got out of there, and I moved in with some older guy. It was,
Oh, we've all got those. We've all got those decisions and moments, and we're just like, what were we thinking?
Yeah. I'm like, oh, do you not have a job or a car? Let's date.
Perfect. Yes. Can only go up from here.
Right. But I had my own apartment. I got myself through high school. And I then met my now husband. We have been together for 20 years. I was 19. We moved in together, and we were really just moving in together because we both needed a place to stay.
Just as friends, roommates, that kind of thing? Just
as friends. I mean, we were already having sex, but we were like, we'll just move in together and we'll stop having sex. It'll be fine. It's not what happened.
Doesn't usually go the other way.
No, the logic of a 19-year-old.
Mm-hmm. We know nothing more than when we were 19 years old.
So true. And so we moved in together, and I fell madly in love with him, but our drug use escalated, like hardcore. We were shooting a lot of meth, a lot of coke. I was drinking every other night. And this is the story, or maybe a part that I don't hear often from people in recovery. I was also having the best time of my life. Like, I know hearing that, it sounds horrific. Like, oh my God, you were shooting up all the time. But it was also, it was fun. It was dangerous. It was living on the edge. And it gave me that sense of power and control that I did not have elsewhere in my life. It made me feel powerful.
Damn. I think that I agree with you. I don't think enough of us really talk about it. I think we just all assume that that's obviously why we were doing the things that we were doing, but that's such a big part of what keeps us mired, isn't it? That it feels good. It's how we feel our best. I mean, I didn't ever feel better than when I was, drunk and partying and having a great time. Like it feels really good when you're in it. And then it doesn't. I guess it's just like that. I think for all of us, that it feels good until it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. Like early on, it was great, but I never stepped out of it. I started, trying to I did the whole thing of I'll switch substances. So I knew shooting up was going to kill me. So at about 22, I stopped doing that. Well, I didn't stop. I was like, once a year, it'll be like a fun thing I do. But then, I switched to drinking, and this is all happening while outwardly my life looks manageable. I'm putting myself through college. I work at a bank. There's not really too many people in my life who would have sat me down and said, Jamie, you're not okay. On the outside, I looked okay.
Yeah, no one's suspecting it. There are no red flags going up anywhere. You appear to be doing everything properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talked a good game, So I did. My best friend during that time, we had been best friends since we were teenagers. She took me out to an Arby's and she's like, man, I'm really worried about your drinking. And I turned it around and made it all about her. So
you've really been primed for gaslighting your whole life.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. Yeah, I had. And I feel like that was the height of my drinking. I mean, those were the times where I was blacking out and I would wake up and I would be like, I did what? I was smashing my face in things, and it was regular, So I knew I couldn't keep going like that. And I knew that
gets a lot harder to hide too when you're smashing your face into things and people at work are like, another weekend funny accident?
Yeah. And then I ruined my friend's wedding, and I just really was like, I don't like being this person. So I was like, I need to cut back on my drinking.
Never just give it up entirely. We just have to reformulate it.
Yeah. And it would have been unfathomable to me, giving up alcohol. What? No.
Totally. No way. It was who I was. It was what I did. It was, I don't think I've ever really put it into these words, and I keep meaning to. I keep thinking I'm going to write it. It was something I was good at, and I was not, in my opinion, good at pretty much anything. So for me to feel like I was good at drinking, that I could drink people under the table, or I could party and I could hold my liquor. I was never the puker. I was holding other girls' hair while they puked. I felt very good at it. As sad as that sounds, it was something that I felt proud of in that way.
Oh yeah, same. I cannot tell you how many times I had bragged about matching men beer for beer. 100%. And then being, oh, absolutely. I loved it.
Yeah.
And again, it's back to that sense of being so powerful, because I didn't feel powerful in any other place. I was really drinking, ultimately this feeling of I didn't feel like I was a good person. I didn't feel like I was worthy. I didn't feel like I was good at anything. I remember sitting in college at about 19, 20 and looking around the room and being like, I don't belong here. Knowing it in my soul. I was the first person to go to college. So I'm looking at these kids and I'm like, they know it. They can smell it on me. I don't belong here.
And tell me what it was that you felt about yourself that didn't belong there.
I think it's rooted in being moved around so much as a kid, and then being the poor kid. And there's this feeling of it's like shabby shoe syndrome, all the kids in the playground can look at you and know that your clothes came from the Goodwill and that you don't have nice stuff and your family's poor. And that's the feeling that would come back to me, is they can all tell I'm not smart enough to be here. I didn't come from a good family, that ultimately who I am inside 100% is not like them.
Yeah, I get that feeling. I moved around a lot as a kid too, and I get that feeling of just, I am not like you. And so did you find, like, from in my experience, I found that I was just constantly kind of following people, or, I was the follower. I wasn't the leader. You seemed to me to be more of a leader in your life, but I was the one that was kind of following people around and just kind of drifting around and landing wherever I landed. How did that look for you in your later teenage years?
So I think that actually now I am more of a leader, but I couldn't accept that role. So I would look for the person stronger than me and then attach myself to that person and then resent them for it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then emotionally bully them because they were trying to lead and I wanted to lead, but I would never admit it to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I had that exact relationship with female friends over and over and over again until I was probably about 30 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us what happened between those ages, sort of, you're working at the bank, you're drinking, it's ramping up, you're now falling, things are happening. I know you said you wanted to calm the drinking down. What happened when you finally stopped drinking? Or do you want to lead us to that point?
Yeah.
Rock bottoms there.
Yeah. So, I always wanted something more than what my family had. I mean, that was deep in me. I knew as a young child that I wanted a way. I didn't know what that would look like because we lived in cities sometimes we didn't. I just wanted a way and I wanted more. So I graduated college. It took forever, when you're drinking every weekend, like you're slow.
A 7-year MFA.
It actually, so this is my undergrad. It did take me 7 years. It really did. And then I had this professor who took an interest in my writing, and he's like, what do you think about graduate school? And that had never occurred to me that is even possible. I didn't even know what it was. I'm like, what's graduate school? I switched to beer only. So I stopped touching any hard liquor. I couldn't handle it. I didn't like how I couldn't control myself. I could drink 20 beers and still be sort of sober.
Yep.
And I was also never a daily drinker. I was a binge drinker. So, sometimes I might go out and have 6 beers and you'd never know I was tipsy. Or would that be the time that I had 15 and I blacked out driving home? Like, I didn't really have a way to know which one it would ever be.
Yeah.
So things started to change. I knew I wanted more. I knew I wanted better. I applied to MFAs. Once I got in New Orleans, I knew that's where I wanted to be. And so that's how I ended up here 10 years ago.
Isn't it amazing that this one professor planted this tiny little seed inside of you and gave you that spark that let you say, maybe I can do this thing over here. And you led down that path. I mean, I just find that it's always so remarkable that we just never know what the words of somebody else or the actions or the feeling that somebody else gives you that can help you to take those next steps. It's just so powerful. And it doesn't have to happen in our own, family of origin. It doesn't have to be your parents that do these kinds of things. I really think that we need to be more open to the influences of other people around us and to be open to the gifts that are always around us. So I'm just so excited that professor, I hope you've kept in touch and that he knows that, that really helped you to go in a different way. No? Oh no.
He's got a little bit of the Me Too movement going on with him.
Okay.
We definitely had a very inappropriate relationship. I do. So here's the thing where all this is really complicated, right? He is a flawed human. Yep. And yes, I was a graduate student, but I was also an adult. I was 28 at the time. Or not a graduate student. Sorry, I was an undergraduate student. I was 27 at the time. And, I was grown and I was also drinking a lot. And he was going through a difficult time in his marriage. So I do believe that he took an interest in my writing. I also believe that was tainted by a sexual attraction to me. Mm-hmm. So I have not kept in touch, but
no, you have not.
But I still do have a lot of gratitude for that moment because my secret wish was to be a writer. I never in a million years. I mean, that's just something you didn't do in my family. Like, get a job where you have a paycheck. Yes. Yeah. So he did actually open that window to say well, yeah, you can come in. Come on in. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of gratitude for him in that moment. But I also know that we're weak, we're human, and we both made mistakes in that time. So I hope he's well, but
yes. Okay. I hope he's also kind of doing the math a little bit, you married your husband at 20.
So we got together at 19. We didn't marry till I was 25, but we were like in an off and on. And I was also like, I was not ethical, but like I really just didn't have a lot of integrity around myself. I was never, there was nothing ever physical with that professor, but it was certainly an emotional affair. And I was absolutely looking for something that I didn't find in myself. I think that my husband knew, but I think he also just has an ability to know that I have to figure things out for myself. So I in no way want to say that he approved. He didn't ask questions. We definitely talked about it later. And, he essentially said, like, I suspected, and also that's not fucking cool. But we were, we've made it through all that stuff. Yes. But I mean, again, it's back to, like, for me, it's back to drinking allowed me to do shit like that and then still tell myself that I was okay.
Yep. Because the drinking excused the behavior?
I think not just that. I think that, like, I did all kinds of things back then that I was like, but that's not really me, Yeah. Whereas when I got sober and I really started to look at my life, I fully could understand everything is me. Everything I do is me. Yeah. But, like, I wouldn't have I didn't consider myself a smoker for 10 years. Like, drinking allowed me to have a veil over all my life.
Right. And you're saying you were smoking cigarettes daily, but because you only did it when you drank, you were like, I'm not really a smoker.
Yes.
Yeah, I get that.
So it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I was drunk and then, like, I had an inappropriate relationship. It wasn't like that. It was like my whole life was like that. Yeah. Like, drinking allowed me to check out every Friday or every Thursday or whatever and not have responsibility for my actions. So I could just, like, put it away and it was a reset.
Oh, and I mean, I think that anyone listening or watching right now, I think we can all really understand why you would have that feeling, considering the weight of responsibility that was placed upon your tiny little 4 or 5, 6, 10-year-old shoulders. Of course you're going to need an escape valve. Of course you're a hatch. Of course you're going to need to blow off some steam and to not be in this person, in this body, in this life, like, escape from this craziness.
And so that did not come to me until very, very recently, until my mom's death, that I could actually say the situations that she put me in early absolutely led to me looking for that. Like, it would come like clockwork all the way till I stopped drinking. I would be good. I would be so good. I would, like, go to work. I would, at the time I was teaching at a university, like, and then on Friday I would be like, I can go get wasted.
Yeah. Like, holding it all together. Like, it's just, almost vibrating, waiting to explode at the end of the week. I think that we can all appreciate why it is that you felt that need to do that. I totally get it. I mean, I didn't have those kinds of pressures, and yet I felt like I had a need to, I was a nightly drinker, though. I find that really interesting that you were more of a weekend binge drinker. I was someone that hid it, but I drank daily. So, okay, so keep going with the story. So now you're at, you're active in the addiction. You're doing the MFA program. You're married to your husband. You're 25, 26, 27. Keep going.
Yep. So at 28, I moved to New Orleans to do my MFA. And oh my God, do writers like to drink?
Of course.
So, but again, like, I had figured out how to be outwardly presenting as if everything is fine and that I just like to have a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And I was so invested in that identity as the fun girl, like, I'll do anything. Like, let's have a contest, dare me, whatever. I really loved being that person. Yeah. And so there was a lot of drinking built into the culture of the MFA. So, like, every Monday night after writing workshop, we went to a bar, our professors went, and everybody else would, like, go home around, 10 or 11. And then I would stay with 1 or 2 other people till like 5 a.m. Yeah. And I was very willful in that, when my husband's like, hey, don't drive our only car drunk, I would be like, don't tell me what to do. I wasn't drunk. And how he lived through that with me, I don't really understand. I think he had a deep knowledge that's not really who I was, and that he was not going to be the person to force me to change, that I was going to get there on my own.
And is your husband, you'd mentioned before that you and your husband used and partied together. Has he's not doing that anymore and watching you, or how is that looking at home right now?
He actually
28, 29.
He actually stopped drinking a few years, but probably about 5 years before I did. And he got like an ulcer, or, he was a whiskey drinker, got an ulcer and stopped. That wouldn't have stopped me. I would have been like, find me the medication, get me the milk of magnesia.
What kind of surgery do you need to do on me? Get this thing taken care of so I can keep drinking.
Totally.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was around that time, he was watching me, and I think he might have been a pot smoker back then, but he definitely, got more sober way before I did. And then, again, like, he just sort of really understood that you don't force someone like me into changing. It has to come from me. And he let it happen. He wasn't a pushover in any way. He really, like, every time, it is not acceptable for you to drive our only car when you're wasted. And then I would just lie and manipulate and do whatever I needed to do to have my way.
Did you two ever come close to ending your relationship? Like, I imagine that this has to get pretty tense after, yeah.
Yes. I think definitely early on, when I said my height of my drinking was in my early to mid 20s, during that, absolutely. We were close to moving out. I think the only reason we didn't is we financially could not afford it, but we spent some time living in the same house, not together. And then when I was in the MFA, I was also very like, I'm going to go away for the weekend and stay in this hotel room with two men that you don't know. And you have to be okay with that, because I do what I want. He was not okay with that. And so that almost broke us up as well. So the MFA was one of the strangest experiences of my life. Like, it is a very insular culture. Like, when you're in it, it's like joining a cult. It was a great experience because I really did improve my writing. I got to connect with people about literature who were as passionate of readers as I was. But it was also, it was toxic. It was emotionally toxic. And then add drinking onto that too, to fragile writer egos, to my own, my own fragile ego, my own drinking, my own big talk. Like, it was all just a really difficult experience. So at about 30 years old, I'm getting done with it. And I know that I can't keep going. My depression got really, really bad at about that time.
And is this the first time that you've admitted that you suffer with depression? Do you know that you've had depression in the past? Like, how does that look?
I think it's the first time that I really could say, like, I would sort of be like, I have sad periods sometimes, but then I pop out of them. Like, I was very committed to, like, I take care of this myself. Yeah. And I think at around 30, it was the first time that I could not take care of it.
Can you tell us what it looked like, what it felt like for you in that time?
Yeah. So I would go out on Friday night, I would get wasted, and I would wake up Saturday with the deepest self-hatred that I've ever experienced in my life. And that would last for days. And then I would hit these. So that was just like every week ongoing. And then on top of that was what I truly believe, huge biochemical problems that I genetically inherited from my family. I would have these cycles where, like, I would be okay, and then I would just dip. And it wasn't sadness. It was utter and absolute despair. No belief that I am, I'm even worthy of killing myself. Like, it was just like, it was darkness. It was gray.
And can I ask, during that time, are you still going to school, still working, still doing things, or are you on the couch in bed, like, blinds drawn? What does that look like?
This is actually a flaw for me. It's like, I will just fucking power through. Yeah. So at that time I was teaching at a university. So I'd get up, I would teach at 8 a.m. I would usually teach till like around 4. I was still doing the stuff that I needed to do to be going to work. And I would come home and I would just like, I would isolated really, really bad. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to go out. but I was still able to do the things that I responsibly was supposed to do.
So you are suffering in an extremely deep, dark depression, and you're still getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, getting yourself to work, teaching a class, being accessible to your students and to your colleagues, and going home and then, still being in these same feelings, but now just shutting the door, and now you're on your own until the next day.
Yeah. And I mean, it's even more baffling now to think back on that time and to think how I was able to perform in the classroom at work. No one would have ever known I was depressed. I was like a super happy singing person.
Oh my gosh. It's really making me think about how I was just interviewed a few days ago, and there was still this it wasn't on a recovery site. So we were talking about addiction, and it was still this feeling where it was like, but you're an alcoholic, like looking at me. Right. And it's like, we just need to remind ourselves that we are all walking around dealing with a ton of shit, and you would never know it. So just knowing that, I was a high functioning alcoholic. I was somebody that was walking around that nobody would have even guessed it. Even some of my closest friends. You were walking around performing at such a high level as a professor in this deep, dark depression. Like, it just is such a reminder to me that you never, ever know what somebody is going through from how they present on the outside.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I excelled at that. And so the depression was, it cycled ongoing. I would have like a couple of good weeks, and then I would have a few bad months, and then I would have a few good weeks. And I mean, it just kept going. And I started to see how these relationships that I had formed, were really bad for me. So I thought, I'll get rid of the relationships. So cut off all my friends, but I was still drinking. And are
you medicated at all for depression at this time, or you're okay? Because I was going to say some people get medicated for depression, but then drink alcohol, and it's kind of like,
No, I was very like, I don't believe in those kind of medications, and yet I will put everything from the street inside of my body.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it's actually the depression that drove me into sobriety. So I was teaching ESL at a university, English as a second language. And I really loved it, but I also was like, I want to take some time and I want to like work on a book. So I saved up my vacation. I saved up my little savings. I told Mike and that, I'm going to take this time off. So there's a few weeks we won't have income. And something in me, I just knew that I would take that time off. And if I drank even once, I would be so fearful from the writing, and I would just keep going, and that I would just waste that time that I have saved for myself. So I knew I would ruin it, that it would be this spiral of like, because any type of thing we do, it gets hard. Yeah. And I wanted to run from that difficulty. And if I had run to alcohol, I knew that it would start, and then I would be ashamed, and then I would be hungover, and then I wouldn't write the next day, and then I would drink that night. And
what a powerful thing to do, only because I know that you and I are connected in a lot of recovery groups. And we often will say that to people who are struggling in the moment where they're like, I just really want to have a drink. And we're like, play it forward, You know what happens. And I find it remarkable that you were able to play it forward without ever having sobriety as part of your reality.
Yeah, I didn't want to be sober. I think by that time, so I was 34, this was in 2014, I had not been sober for a weekend probably since I was about 16, maybe 14. So I took that time, I think it was like around 6 weeks or 2 months. And at the end of it, I could not deny that my depression was better. Like, I was just like, maybe these are connected.
Wow. Can you tell us then, what did that look like? So you went from at the beginning of taking that time being in that dark place, and then after those 6-8 weeks, how are you feeling?
I was feeling better. There's no denying that. I was absolutely I physically felt better. That's the thing about like getting into my 30s is like, I didn't physically rebound from the kind of drinking I was doing the way I used to.
Yeah.
So like, I used to drink all night and get up at 8 and go to work. Yeah. I was like having 3-day hangovers in my 30s. Yeah. It's like now it is mind-blowing to me that I was just like, this is how life is.
Yeah. I just need to spend 3 days recuperating from Friday.
Right.
Crazy.
So I decided to keep it going, to keep the sobriety going. Cause like, I was really just thinking in increments of time. So like I could do 6 weeks. I did 6 weeks and I felt better, and by better, like the depression was still there, but I could sort of handle it. Whereas before I felt like I couldn't.
And can I ask, during this time, are you really open with Mike about what you're doing, or are you still like, you're not sure what you're doing, so you're keeping it to yourself?
I mean, I definitely told him about my increments of time, but no way would I have ever said, and I'm going to try to keep, I'm trying to try to be sober. That wasn't even on my mind. The thought of not going, like what I really truly believed is that I would hit a reset and then I could drink again.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I wasn't even admitting to myself that this is what I was doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was sober for 6 months by myself. But I was still getting I was still really depressed. And then I got sober and realized I had like zero fucking coping mechanisms, like no skills.
Zero. Yes.
Zero.
Yeah. Your only coping mechanism, I think, up until this point is you just get shit done. Like stuff presents itself to you, you take care of it. Something else comes, you take care of it.
So as long as there's like shit to do, I'm fine. But like if I have to sit for a second,
No, and be with myself and be with my thoughts.
No, forget it. So like the 6 months I was seeing a therapist at the time, and she was like, why don't you try AA? And I was like, I don't need that. Those people are weird. And so I didn't. And then 6 months in, I went to this little dinner party with some nationally recognized writers, and I was nervous. And I'm sitting at the dinner table, and everybody's going around and ordering wine, and they're like, I'll take this. And in my head, I'm like, oh my God, okay, like this has been a great experiment. It's been super good for me, and I think like tonight's the night. I'm gonna get some wine, see how I do. And then this guy that I have known for years, like sat down next to me. He's a playwright. We've been at Mardi Gras parties together. I mean, I've been around this guy so much.
You've shown him your boobs.
No, we don't do that here. Only the tourists do that.
Fair enough.
So he orders water, and I'm like, oh, you're not going to have any wine? And he's like, no, alcohol turns me into an asshole. And it starts this conversation that he had been in recovery for 10 years, and I had never known. And that is what saved me from like actually drinking that night. Mm-hmm. So he took me to my first 12-step meeting, and this was a few days.
That same night he took you to a meeting?
No, we actually met a few days later. We went for a walk in the park, and I'm interrogating him. I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you that 10 years later you have to go sit in a meeting still? Like clearly this doesn't work.
Yeah.
And he was an atheist, and very committed to his recovery, but had very different ideas that countered my assumptions about what 12-step life was. So I agreed to let him take me, and I found that I needed it. That what I was missing in my sobriety in those 6 months was I had no idea how to be a sober person. I didn't know how to look for coping skills or how to navigate anything. And I didn't have a sober community, like at all. All my friends drank, all of them.
Yeah.
And then that started a fraught relationship with 12-step, with AA groups. I was really committed to being the exception, to being the like, these people are weird and I don't need this. And I'm not really an alcoholic. And just every way I could resist, I could. There's a saying in the rooms where you say, look for the similarities, not the differences. And that's not what any of us do.
In real life, no.
No. So, despite all of the things I've told you that would suggest that I had a lot of substance abuse problems, I'm looking at the people in there and I'm like, well, you don't have a fucking job, so I'm not like you. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't listening to what they were saying about the emotional consequences of being an addict and an alcoholic, mm-hmm. which for me have been the same no matter who I've met, whether it's someone who's like, I drank a little bit on the weekends and that was enough. Our emotional connections are usually identical. Mm-hmm. So then I relapsed. I decided like 9 months later, I was like, I'm going to try drinking. It's been long enough. I'm totally fine now.
And did you kind of feel like even all the way along, you had planned that relapse? Like you kind of could see it coming? Like I know for me, I relapsed 4 years into my sobriety and I could see it coming. I really knew that it was happening.
I don't think I saw it at the time. I can look back now. I can definitely, I think, so I relapsed at a wedding. Like I was at this beautiful New Orleans wedding where a brass band is playing and it's out on the river. And somebody goes by with a tray of champagne and I'm just like, whoop, and there it is.
And are you with Mike? I'm curious if you're with your husband at this wedding. No,
I'm with my best friend from, I retained one friend from graduate school, actually two. So I was at the one's wedding with my best friend. Mm-hmm. And we have since forged a beautiful sober relationship together, but we were drinkers together. Mm-hmm. And I think the months prior to that, I had been planning to drink at that event. And I didn't really know it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I drank for 9 months. Nothing happened. I mean, I sort of thought that like, I don't know, I would like spiral out of control and then be like snorting heroin off of somebody's ass in like 3 months.
If only.
Yeah. And that's not what happened. I had like, calm drinks in backyards and things like that. But like, again, I felt lesser. I felt like I had been vibrating at this higher frequency. And I know that sounds super woo, but it did. It felt like I was just like clouds were parting. And the moment I was drinking again, it was like I just went back to stasis.
Yes.
And I don't know. So I was standing at a gas station one night and I'm standing in line with all these dudes and I'm buying cigarettes, which I don't want to smoke anymore. I'm buying alcohol. So I drank, I think, a bottle of wine with a couple of friends who were not big drinkers. And so, of course, on the way home, I had to get more because there was only one bottle for 3 of us.
God.
And I'm with all...
really,
they're so weird.
People that can have one glass of wine and leave a couple sips. Like, what are you doing?
I don't get it. Mm-hmm. So, I'm standing in line with these guys and like, they've been drinking, I've been drinking. We all stink like cigarettes. And it was just this like, it was like the lights flickered above me. And it was like this moment of total clarity where I was like, this will be my life. This is it. This is what it was like before I got sober. This is now what it's like that I'm drinking again. And all of the things that I want for myself will not happen because like I'm staying right here and I'm never going above this.
Yeah. Can I ask, so during that 9-month period that you are going to AA meetings, is that where the clouds are parting, where you're starting to really see a different life? Like you're learning tools, you're dealing, better coping mechanisms, like all of that is happening in that 9-month period?
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I actually misspoke. It was almost 2 years. I'm so bad with like time and math.
Yeah. So you mean your relapse lasted about 2 years?
No, my time in AA was almost 2 years. My relapse was 9 months. Yeah, it was like that. So for whatever, by the grace of God, like I walked into my time with AA and found this group of women that were like almost exactly like me. And I'm still with that group. Mm-hmm. So we're of similar ages. We drank very similarly. Most of us are, I think all of us are professionals. A couple of us are moms. Mm-hmm. And so meeting them forced me during that time to see like myself. Like there was no avoiding it. I could look at like a man in his 60s, like talking about being in a crack house, almost getting shot and being like, I'm nothing like that man. But with these women, like I had to look at them and say like, they're me. And it was, so I always say that Mike is the first person in my life who showed me unconditional love. He really, really is. These women did it in a different way. They held up a mirror to me to say like, this is actually what your addiction might look like. And you've been telling yourself, and no one ever said this, by the way, they're not that direct. They're like, you figure it out on your own. But, I had my thinking was like, I've been telling myself this story about how capable I am drinking and using drugs. And now I have to really look at the truth, which is I've kept myself small. I've kept myself from doing the things that I'm actually truly capable of. I've stayed at a job that maybe I don't find fulfilling and I don't make any money. And that like, these are consequences of addiction, not some predestined lot in life that I just have to accept. Mm-hmm. So those almost 2 years, yeah, the clouds were parting. I was, learning how to do things and having people tell me things that just blew my fucking mind, like what other people think of you is none of your business. I'm like, yes, it is. I have to convince them that like I'm in control and I'm right.
Yes. It is the most important thing. What are you talking about?
Totally.
Oh, totally get it. People pleasing is like, sign me, of course. Yeah.
And, it was really like the first time that I had, people that I like really respected showing me that I was not an honest person. And I really thought I was.
Ooh,
yeah.
Yeah, that's tough.
That shit was hard.
Yeah, that is hard. And it's just a quick moment here to remind people that are watching, because so many people that are watching, maybe you've Googled how to get sober or how do I recover or what is sobriety or, AA. And as you'll know, watching these videos, it's not about one way of getting sober, but when it does come to AA, I will say that a lot of people try one meeting and with those 6-year-old people or whoever it is that just don't resonate with you, that don't connect with you, that you don't feel like you are anything like, that's not even necessarily true. You can always learn from others, but just like a restaurant, I tell people this, if you go to one restaurant and you don't like it, it doesn't mean that you never go to another restaurant. Check out other meetings, check out Smart Recovery, Refuge Recovery.
Yes.
Really finding community in recovery truly is the saving grace for so many people. I've now had enough of these conversations where it is it's the linchpin. It's where everything changes when people finally find a community around them that are other people saying me too. And I wish that wasn't taken now in such a different kind of a context, but that feeling of me too, I've been there too, I understand you and you're not alone. So for anyone watching right now, try all sorts of things, try to meet all different kinds of people in real life and online, all of it.
All of it. And also, the thing with AA is like, it's not my only avenue to recovery. Yeah. I do so much stuff. Yeah. I take pieces from so many different places.
Yeah. And can you share some of that other stuff? That's usually a question I leave for the end. What are your tools in sobriety? But I'd like to know, why not lead into that now?
Yeah, like I actually joke all the time, it takes a village to keep me sober. So, the rooms are a big part of my life. And I mean, again, I want to actually like jump back to what you said about try different meetings. So I went to a meeting for a year that was full of older people and I didn't really like it, but it gave me a lot. And it led to me meeting the first women of this really tight group I have now. And then, go finding the women's meeting that is really my home. And so it's that idea of like, you keep looking. Don't just walk away from the first shitty meeting. Cause I've totally been to shitty meetings. Like people forget that AA is made up of people. And sometimes we're fucking crazy or we say shit that's not kosher or we're not kind. It's also made up, anybody can come. So you can still be actively drinking and walk in the room. So sometimes people are going to say some really messed up things. So AA is a big part of me. The community that I've formed there of women, huge. Like I could not have made it through the past year without them. I really believe that. Our online community. So like I'm part of a couple of online private Facebook groups, also through my blog or through Instagram. Like those are invaluable. I have been to multiple cities and been like, hey, does anyone live here? And then met these women in real life. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah. But all the way to things that we don't often, some of us do, but we often don't discuss like how much food plays into recovery. Huge. So treating my body well is a huge part of my recovery. Weirdly, honesty, like self-honesty, like making sure I'm daily living from a place of integrity. So I don't have to live with that shame that I had from all those years where I was living as an addict, not just actively using, but living as an addict.
And do you feel that was hard for you to become, you were somebody who lied a lot. I was somebody who lied a lot. Did you find that that's taken a lot of unraveling? Like I even find myself still, like if I'll say, I don't want to tell a single lie today, like even the little things where someone will say, how does this look? And I'm like, I really want to tell them that I don't think it looks that good, but I'm not going to say that. So that, and you know, like even these little things, like I'm wondering, for me, that was a big part of it, was being somebody who could live with integrity, who could look themselves in the mirror and respect the reflection looking back. And it took me a long time to unravel that old me and the old ways of being. I'm wondering if that was your story too.
God, yes. I mean, so much so that I didn't know I was lying. I would have it pointed out to me of like, you said this thing. And I'd be like, oh, that wasn't true. Was that? And it was, you know, the first time that I noticed that I lied a lot, I was on the phone with a group of friends and they were like, you know, we want to go do this thing. And I was like, oh, I can't do it. I have a second job. And I hang up the phone and my husband's like, you don't have a second job. It had not even occurred to me that like that was not an honest thing to do. I was just like, yeah, well then they won't ask me and I won't have to go to stuff and like it's perfect. Like that's how deeply ingrained lying was to me. Like I had no idea.
Yeah. And it's almost like, I mean, my mother is like the queen of white lies. You know, if it's going to save you know, if it's to be nice, or if it's going to save an altercation, or if it's going to, you know, save any kind of issue, then that's an appropriate time to lie. And so I think I've come by it honestly, that I've just, you know, I'd rather tell someone a lie if it's not going to make them feel bad or whatever. So I think that was probably similar to what you were doing. Like you didn't want to say no and then have them be all, you know, well, why? And it's just easier to lie about it. Yeah, I get that.
And you know, when I went back for my grandfather's death, I was in the house with all of my aunts. My mom wasn't there yet, but my aunts were there. And it had been the first time I'd been back with everybody since I was a child. So I was there as an adult, a sober adult. Mm-hmm. And I'm watching everyone say different things to each other and then using those to like start fights or like gain favor. And it was a moment of like, oh, this is exactly what I do. This is why I lie. Like they're all trying to avoid the giant blow up, but they're making it worse. Mm-hmm. They're like tangling the lies. So like, they don't even remember what they said to their mother versus their sister. Mm-hmm. And it was this moment of revelation of like, oh, I come from this. I had to unlearn this.
Yeah. Oh my God. Unlearning half the time harder than learn. Really, it's harder than
learn.
learn.
Totally. Yeah.
I want to know. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying most of the time, like with that kind of stuff, we don't even know it exists for a really long time.
Yeah. And I think it takes getting sober or getting real in whatever way that is in our lives. But in our case, it's instead of using outside substances to be able to numb this stuff away or to ignore it or to push it down or to just kind of be in this other type of personality, you know, it's really owning our own shit.
Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm. So can you go now into, so now you're, you know, you're in your 30s, you're now sober. So after your 9-month relapse, what was it then that got you, okay, wait a minute, I don't want to do this anymore?
It was that moment in the gas station of really recognizing that like my life would never change.
So did you buy the bottle of wine and the cigarettes in the gas station that night and continue?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you were already still smelling like cigarettes. You'd already had a couple glasses of wine.
Yeah, I came home and I sat on my porch and I got really drunk and, you know, I felt horrible the next day. And like, and that was it. I was really, I just fully surrendered to the idea that this would be forever, you know, like it would just, I do believe eventually I would have gotten worse. I do believe because I see that in my life of like, it just escalated for me. So, you know, I may have stopped before I had quote external consequences, but I think that I would have eventually had those. But for whatever reason, I had that moment of clarity, that moment of grace to be like, you know, nothing will change. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I decided to quit. I went back to AA. I
was going to ask you, during that time, that 9-month, were you completely not going to meetings, and were your girlfriends wondering where you'd gone, or was there any communication there?
I had really, you know, I had shame around not handling something. So I cut off communication. Mm-hmm. They did not, you know, they reached out a few times. I didn't reach back, and like, you know, we drifted apart. But the moment that I was ready to come back in, they all welcomed me with open arms. Totally. It was really hard for me to walk in and be like, I'm only a week sober. Like at a meeting, I had so much shame around that. because I am someone who is so comfortable in being the expert, you know, like I'm here to tell you how things are and I have authority. And, you know, part of the surrender is, for me, it was walking in and being like, you know, I'm human. I don't have it under control.
Isn't that the biggest piece in recovery? For me, for sure.
You know, I'm so glad that moment came. But even in that, so like in that moment, I surrendered. I feel like I had enough recovery so that while I was out drinking, I had this observer who was like, and this is not normal, and you're still keeping track of all the alcohol and making sure there's enough for yourself, and you're still like stopping on the way home. And so when I stopped, like my relapse at that time was the greatest blessing, because it got rid of all, remember I had said I was super resistant and I was like, I don't belong here. Totally got rid of that.
Yeah.
But it got rid of that with alcohol. And I still had this belief that like, I didn't have a problem with other things. So there were, you know, a few times after that where I like had a backache and manipulated my way into getting someone's hydrocodone that I probably could have just taken Tylenol and been fine. And so I had a few more of those times, and that has led me back to like square one of being like, I falsely believed that like I could control that, or that wasn't an issue, and I didn't have to worry about, you know, pill use because I didn't do it all the time. And then square one is like, do I want to show up as a sober woman present in my life no matter what? Or is it worth these little like weekend escapes that I, you know, try to run to? And where I've finally gotten to is I want to show up as a sober woman. And that's the power. The power is not that I can't have these things. It's that the person I want to be is present and here and sober and trying to live in integrity.
Yeah, man. And not having to rationalize those decisions. If you did decide, okay, I'll do this on the weekends just because I need the escape, but it's like, you still have to rationalize all of that. You still have to wrap your head around it. And I think that for me and for you, that we know that that's not living in integrity. We know that that's not in our best interest. We know that is where the clouds start to, you know, come in as opposed to open up.
And that also, so like the pills were like, I would rationalize the situation. And then I think there were 3 times, and they were all like, I would manufacture an illness to be worse than it was. Like, yeah, did I hurt my back on a trampoline trying to act like a 12-year-old? Yes. But I was also okay. Like I was okay. But what that led to is I didn't have to lie to people, you know, like, or worse, tell them the truth. So I had to come home and tell my husband, like, you know, oh, I had a backache and I took these pills, and then like try to manipulate his reaction to that. And that's exhausting. To give that stuff up is the miracle to me.
Do you think that because of your early experience with your mom really putting you in this position of power and control in the household, that you are someone who seeks power and control? Or did you almost feel like you use drugs and alcohol to be able to take a breather and escape from all of that pressure of having to always be in control and knowing what to do next and dealing with crises and all of that pressure?
I think it's both. I think I sought it. You know, I think I actively, but it's actually, so I'm just now like unraveling this in therapy.
Sure. Yeah.
I think what I'm slowly starting to realize is that, you know, I do have a big personality, and, you know, I am smart, I am capable, but because of where I came from, I hid from that. And so my natural inclination I'm the oldest. My natural inclination is to take charge of a situation. But then I would hide from that, and I would shy away from that. And so I think I both sought it and then feared it and then drank to escape it. So it was always this push and pull, and it was exhausting. So the other gift that recovery has given me is that like, I'm actually starting to see for the first time in my life, you know, I'm really capable of things, which I know it sounds trite, but if, for instance, I quit my job, like without having another one, I think like 3 weeks ago.
So we were going to get into that. Let's do it now. Let's take ourselves. So you went back to AA, you got sober, you're now sober. And 3 weeks ago, you decide to quit your job.
Well, let's back up and go to, so like, you know, I'm living as a sober person and I lose my grandpa and then I lose my mom and dad, or my mom and dad. I lose my mom and my grandma.
Yeah.
And I knew what to do after that. I knew how to show up because it was crisis time. So, you know, I knew how to show up and be there for my brother. You know, I knew how to,
like, finding your mom, being there for your brother, getting the funeral arrangements all taken care of, calling insurance, house packing up, like all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when I, you know, and this is, you said it earlier about learning how to ask for help. This experience has taught me that, like, I am not the general manager of the universe. Yeah. And, you know, and I'm also not a crisis intervention specialist. I have a friend who says that to me all the time. Like, maybe you don't have to be the sole means of support for this person because you're not a crisis intervention specialist.
Yeah.
And so it taught me to ask for help. And so, like, my whole community, like, just came out in full force to support me.
But
So
I feel like, and as much as, and I'm sorry to keep cutting you off, but I kind of keep making this point, but I feel like, you know, you're not a crisis intervention specialist, but yet you have spent so much of your life being a crisis intervention specialist.
Yeah.
It's really hard, isn't it, to unlearn, like we talked about, it's hard to unlearn those patterns and to make new choices when that is who we've been. That's our identity. It's been the way that we've done things and how we've controlled situations. And I just want to congratulate you so much on being able to listen to your friend in that moment and to ask for help and to receive help, because that's huge.
Well, it's hard. You know, even knowing that I had just experienced this with my family, it was still hard to, like, accept dinners. But again, like, I was slowly being taught how to care for other people. You know, I feel like that's not something I really got in my growing up. My mom really didn't know how to care for us when past the point when we were babies. So that experience, like, taught me both how to receive help, and then when someone else is in need, how to truly show up and be supportive, which is not taking, you know, responsibility or control of the situation that belongs to someone else. Like, it turns out that's not actually what most people need. But it, you know, when you were talking about, like, you know, I've had this lifetime of training. It's what occurred to me is, like, what a false sense of comfort it gave me that I could walk into any crisis and feel like I could take control. Like, it's not a true thing.
Yeah. And it's like, because I think that so many of us think that, like, I feel like I'm very good in crises, but it's like, it's almost like we don't need to be that. We don't have to, like, because we think of it as being such a strength. And yet it isn't always a strength.
Well, and it hasn't been for me because it has been at the expense of myself. So, like, yeah, I'll just keep going and keep going and keep going. And then I will crash. And then I will, like, ghost people or isolate and so, you know, I'm not doing anyone service really when I'm not supporting them in a loving way, when I'm trying to take responsibility of a situation that belongs to them. And the experience of those deaths back to back to back, like, you know, they so taught me, like, I'm not really in charge of anything, you know? I'm just not.
Yeah.
So after the immediacy of the deaths, you know, there's still, like, I don't know, there was still, like, sort of a role that I knew I needed, like, accept help and, like, do these things. And then month 3, I hit the darkest depression, excuse me, that I've ever been in my life. Like, I feel like my other experiences with depression, there was always a part of me that would know, you know, I wanted to come out of this. But the sinking into the losing my mom, losing her the way I lost her, grieving the fact that I never really had her because she was so trapped in her body and her sorrows and her own bitterness. I just, like, I was just really gone in my grieving. I was really like, I don't want to feel better. I don't really know if I want to keep going. I had a lot of guilt about, why do I get all this good stuff and my mom didn't get any of it? Like, why do I get this community? Why do I get this great job? Like, why do I get all this stuff? And I remember sitting in a yoga class and, like, you know, crying in Savasana and feeling really supported and loved. and then just feeling like, why do I get this? You know, I had a lot of that.
And were you ever able to answer it?
I was. I'm really fortunate to have people around me who kept telling me, let your depression have its time. Don't try to fix it. That's what I want to do. I was like, I've grieved. I want to feel better.
Yeah.
And so I let it have its time. I pondered that question a lot. I journaled it. And that's another recovery tool for me. I journal constantly.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is partially there is no answer, for some of it, like, why was I super good at school and just knew how to perform and my mom wasn't and didn't, and my middle brother isn't. He's mechanically gifted, but like school. So some of it like was out of my control. And then some of it was because I am a seeker and I kept showing up over and over and over again. I grasped at ropes that my mom really never did. And that's complicated.
It's hugely complicated. That could be an hour conversation alone talking about that, just because of rooted in how she was raised and her values, her beliefs, her limiting beliefs, and then how they, we womb our wounds, they say.
Yeah.
I feel like you've had to really unpack a lot of her stuff that wasn't even necessarily yours, but that you had to carry for a long time. So you're not sort of healing just your own wounds. You are healing the wounds of generations that have gone on before you.
Yeah. Oh man, I feel that so deeply with losing both her and her mom together.
Huge.
Because I can see how tightly interwoven they are, and how much so many of my beliefs have been bound up in their stuff.
Mm-hmm. So tell us, how did you grieve and stay sober?
Oh God, yes. Man, this is like one of the most important things that this experience has given me. And that is the ability to like honestly look at people and honestly say to them, you can lose what feels like fucking everything and still be sober.
Yeah.
And before I even say how I did it, I want to say how important it is that I did it. Because I mean, don't get me wrong, I had so many moments where I was like, nobody would blame me.
Nope.
Who's going to say shit to you? They're not.
Nope.
Especially
because you were the kind of person that was so high functioning that I'm sure you had a lot of people around you being like, you're fine. You drink like us. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't.
Yeah, I totally did. And I also feel like, there you get a free pass if you want it. People are not going to be like, oh my God, I can't. They're going to be like, of course you did. Mm-hmm. So I had the thoughts, but I also, I know it to my core that had I drank through this, I would have made this about me. I would have not been able to show up for my brother, who has his own deeply complicated relationship with my mom and was the driver, and had to, he had to crawl out from underneath her body to get out of the van. So I would have made this whole experience about me, my loss. And I didn't. And so the gift of being sober through this is like, it has been painful, but it has been me at every step. There has been no point where I was acting in a way that was not in line with my integrity, with who I want to be. And I don't even know how to explain like what a gift that is.
I wonder if therein lies the trick to it. Even in moments where anybody would say, of course you deserve to have it, go ahead, have a drink. We wouldn't judge you and we wouldn't care. In those exact moments, still behaving in the way that you believe is keeping you closer to your higher self. I think therein lies the real lesson of it.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. There was also a part of me that felt like this grief deserves to be honored and felt. Yeah. And drinking or using would have numbed that out. And as much as my relationship was difficult with my mother, I felt like I had lost an organ. Like, our connection was so deep. The loss of her felt very physical to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it also felt like a gift that I could honor that grief with my presence and my acknowledgement. And I think that leads to how do you stay sober when you lose all this shit? And I do think that, like, you've really hit the number one thing, which is really honoring the person who you are, not who you want to be, but like who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing, I knew in my heart that I would not be the person I am using through this. The other piece has been a lot of practices that felt very necessary. So, I had to work through this. Like, I don't come from money.
Yeah.
And so
you got like the standard 5 days or something like that. And then,
and then I had to go back to work. And I knew that, like, I have a propensity for like shutting shit off and putting it away. And I knew it would come out sideways. I knew this was too big. And so I made space for it every single day. So every night I built an altar for my mom and my grandma. And every night I would come home and I would light candles and I would sit there and I would journal about them. And, in the beginning, there's no like verb for this other than I experienced, it didn't feel active. It felt like it was being done to me. The like convulsive sobbing of the loss with them. And I knew, even then I knew, like, this is what has to be done to move through it. I knew I was moving through something. I didn't believe it would be like this forever. I knew the loss of them would be forever and the missing them. But I knew that it would only be this deep for a set amount of time, and that avoiding it would prolong it. And I knew that because, again, wise people in my life, my very dear friend lost her son to a heroin overdose about 1.5 years ago. And so she was able to be the light on the path through grief and tell me, give it its time. And so every single night I gave it its time, and that felt super important to me. It felt really important to hear her voice. So I had voicemails that I would listen to connect with her. The other piece is I leaned into spirituality, which that was not my thing. I was very much an atheist. But my mom passing gave me something like really tangible to connect to and look for guidance. Another very wise friend of mine who lost her mother to cancer said, my mom was never able to emotionally be there for me in a way that was really healthy, but now she is. And that spoke to me. That really, I don't know, it was just like this thing released, and I really understood that I could still connect to my mom, that whatever she is now, she is still somewhere in existence. And my friend said, talk to her. And so I do.
I love that so much. I mentioned to you before we started recording that I feel a similar feeling, that my father is more accessible to me now in death than he was for a very long time while still living. And so I can really relate to that feeling that you're having, that now we're just able to really, like, it's almost like that direct line, instead of having to deal with, well, should I call now? Is this going to be a good time? There's none of that anymore. And I love the saying, Brian Calhoun is an author locally here where I live, and he wrote a book called The Gift Within the Darkness, I believe is the title. And in the very beginning, the dedication, it said, something like, death is not to be feared. Death is simply the evolution of one's soul. And when I read that, it just resonated as the truth. And, that was almost 6 years after my dad had passed away. And I'd already had experienced feeling my father still close with me, and even closer with me in death than in life. And watching Prince Harry and Meghan get married, I live in Canada, so we're big fans of the royal family. And watching that wedding and listening to Adrian, I keep forgetting her last name, whoever she is on the CBC, and she was saying that there is so much, they were doing some beautiful tributes to Diana at the wedding, just her favorite flowers in certain places and just different things. And the newscaster was saying there is so much presence in absence.
Yeah.
And that was just another moment where it was just like, yes, we have to grieve. Grief is a part of life. It's, as they say, it's the, you know, the payment for having loved. It's the receipt you get for having loved so readily, or even if not, even if it's been a challenging relationship, no matter what it is, there is grief there, and it must be honored. And so I commend you so much, truly, Jamie, the work that you have done in the months since your mother and your grandmother have passed away, and your grandfather. It's just been, I mean, everyone would expect that you would just do whatever it is that you want to do to get yourself through that, and no one would have any judgment. And yet what you've done is you've shown us how to grieve with grace and with humility and with love. And you're truly a woman that I greatly admire. I cannot imagine going through the things that you have gone through. Yes, I lost my father, and it felt too soon. He was 70. Your mother, you know, I know you had a challenging relationship, and it was really difficult all through those years, but you never can prepare yourself for something like this. And the way that you have handled it really has been remarkable. Thank you for showing us how you are still going through the grieving process.
Thank you. That is, I don't even know what to say to that. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm wondering, I like to ask a couple of questions. So first off, I want to let people know that, yes, you mentioned that you've quit your job. So now you are taking some time just for you to kind of figure out what your next steps are. Like you started to say, you never would have done this before, just, quit your job without something else to go to, but this felt like the right decision at this time in your life. And you're putting the writing a little bit on pause, but if people want to connect more with you, they can go to your blog, which you co-write with, I forget the name of your partner.
Nikki Mayu.
Yeah. And the two of you write some really cool pieces. And I know there have been some pieces written there about grief. So anyone watching right now, if this is something that you're going through, you're definitely going to want to hook in with everything that Jamie is writing about. So on The Neutral Ground. So is it theneutralground.net is the
website? That's us. Yes.
And then so for people to connect with you on Instagram and on Facebook, what is your handle there?
I'm not on Facebook much, but for Instagram, I'm on all the time, and I'm Jamie_Amos, AMOS.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know that you're going to have people that are definitely going to want to be reaching out to you. Your story is magnificent. You are remarkable. I want to know, so we've talked about your tools in sobriety that include treating your body well and meditation, setting up altars, going to AA meetings, having community both online and in real life. I know that you have a couple of pit bulls, I think, and you love your dogs, and she's
right next to me.
I could hear her kind of walking around. I'm like, too cute. I would love to know, what are the best things about being clean and sober?
Oh, wow. So this I don't think I ever in a million years expected, but something that has happened really recently is that I fully realize how much I really like the person I am. Never, ever would have thought that was possible. But I really can see the things that people have told me all my life. And I am just now starting to understand that these things are true. And that is only through recovery, through sobriety, that those have been possible.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And I have one more. I like to borrow it from Oprah. Jamie Amos, what do you know for sure?
I know for sure my mom loved me the best that she could. I know that deep in my heart. And I'm just now beginning to really do the work of what it means that she maybe didn't love me as well as I needed. But I know for sure that she loved me.
I know for sure that she loved you too. You're just too lovable not to. I understand that was a complicated relationship, but truly the only thing that's real is love. And I fully believe that. And your mother is right beside you, and she is so proud of you. And so is your grandmother. I'm so glad that they're together. I guess there's part of me that thinks that it's kind of beautiful in a way that they pass so close to one another and that they are together. And
I really like to imagine that my grandfather was, wherever they go, that he was there, got there first, got the lay of the land, and then they crossed over a couple of months later. And that I actually joke that I like to imagine that they're all up there in therapy sessions together.
Here's what I think. I think you're doing the therapy so that all of them can just go and have a great time, and they can just, get all of that amazing juju all the way up through. Continue to be such a bright light, Jamie. And I just encourage you, whatever this time is right now for you, whatever it looks like for you, I'm just so proud of you for taking that big, bold step to quit that job, that known thing, to jump into something that's so unknown. I fully believe with everything in my being, the universe has your back, as Gabby Bernstein says. I don't think that there is anything for you to fear. I think right now, this is truly the time for you. I think that a lot of stuff is going to come from this time. I know you've kind of put a pause on the writing. I think that it's just going to be a really beautiful time for you. And I'm so proud of you for embracing this time that you need. You finally are doing this thing, this gift that you're giving yourself, because you are seeing the true value and worth that is Jamie. You are remarkable. I love you dearly.
Oh, I love you too. I actually have we quickly end on a brand new development. I got a new job on Wednesday. And but when
congratulations.
Thank you. When I was job hunting, I wrote down, these are all the things that I really want. And there were things like the ability to work from anywhere, to like work from home,
yes.
To work in, involving writing and creativity and the things that I'm good at. And I got that job.
Yes.
So I quit my job without anything. And then really seriously, things showed up and I got that job.
Congratulations. And what a message and lesson to leave on. That is the lesson to anybody watching right now, that you're scared shitless to leave whatever it is that you're doing, that you feel like you are stuck, that you feel that there is, there's too much that you've built up here to just throw it away and go try something else. But really, truly, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to throw everything away the way I did in my life, and kind of what Jamie's saying, that she just kind of is just jumping out into the unknown. You don't have to necessarily do everything without a safety net, but believe us, like, there is nothing like taking those big, bold steps. The universe wants you to succeed. It does not want you to fail. And so if you're doing something right now that you're feeling like it is just so far away from who you really want to be, really, I encourage you, listen to what Jamie's saying and just take that leap of faith, even if it's just a small step. Maybe it's turning a hobby into something that you do a bit more. Maybe you sell pieces for money instead, or if you've just started to write, put something out there, start a blog, whatever it is. It's just, we get one trip around this earth. And if there's anything I've learned from Jamie's story, from following you, Jamie, for now, since this crisis happened, is that we get one shot at life. And we never know if we're going to make an accidental left-hand turn and have our entire lives completely shatter.
Yeah. And, the thing about what you just said as well is that, it's not as if out of nowhere I quit a job and then another one magically came up. This is like step 1 million that started 4 years ago when I took that first step of I want a different kind of life. And I know sobriety is going to get me there. And so every small step along that way has led to this moment. And so that thing of just making that next right step with the thing that you want to do or you want your life, no, does the job magically show up the next day? Or absolutely not. But over time, those better choices lead to better choices, lead to better choices. And my active seeking out, eventually good things stick.
And that act of seeking out started way back when you started looking at your drinking and your drug use to say, this doesn't feel like who I really am.
Yeah.
So you're so right that, oh my gosh, isn't it just that everything we want is on the other side of sobriety, of recovery?
Yes.
That's where the magic is. So yes, you would not be in this situation right now and being able to handle everything that you've been handling if not for your sobriety and your recovery and the beautiful way that you are choosing to live your life. Jamie Amos, you are an inspiration to me and to so many. Once again, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you.
To get access to all of the free videos and interviews, visit sobrietystartshere.com.